Hey everybody, it's Brian Hunt, and welcome back to another episode of Risk On, Risk Off. And I think the title of my show, I think, is very appropriate these days. And let me give you the background. Risk On, Risk Off is actually a term that's referred to the financial markets when things are going wonderful and then things are going up, but people have animal spirits. The risk is on. People are willing to take on that risk and hence invest. When things are going south, like today or this past 3 months, people have a tendency to take their risk off and as a result go to flight to safety, cash, or hide underneath the covers. As a result, we're seeing that today. And if anything, the past 3 months has been, to say politely, very dramatic in the sense that there have been a lot of changes coming at us in the past 3 months with the return of the Trump administration and what they have been looking to do. And a lot of what they've been doing the past 3 months, I would say maybe has been done on steroids, but there's been a trend line that's got us to this point. And obviously, there's a lot of fear out there in the market. People are pretty scared as far as what's going to happen, what's going to impact their financial portfolio, and not just their financial portfolio, your company, a way of life. Your ability to import products overseas or your comfort in traveling overseas is very much being dramatic impact in the past 3 months. And try to put it all together. I brought together an all-star panel of some of my top guests, and I'm very, very excited to bring back to the show. First of all, I want to introduce Mr. Thom Shanker. Thom, good to see you again, sir.
Nice to see you, Brian. I'm honored to be here. And I always thought Risk On, Risk Off was a Karate Kid joke. So thank you.
No, it's actually, I guess, I listen to Bloomberg Surveillance in the morning all the time. Tom King, he introduced me to that term. I just loved it, considering what I do. So there we go. Now I'm going to add Mr. Tom Barnett to the show. Hey, Tom, good to see you back.
Glad to be on.
And also join us is Mr. Juliette Kayyem. Juliette, how are you?
Hi, Kayyem. I'm good. I just finished office hours, so I'm ready. Oh my God.
All right. Well, I'm not going to bother the introduction because everybody should know who you are, especially if you watch our last episodes. But we've got a lot to talk about, and there's been, as I was saying, Juliette, it's a lot of turmoil in the past 3 months. And
what?
I think people have a lot of questions as far as where we are, where we're going. And so let's just go ahead and jump right into it because yesterday, the Trump administration dropped the hammer when it came respects to tariffs across the board, across entities, even to islands off the shores of Australia where there are only penguins living there. So it's scattershot. It's hitting everything. And the markets don't like uncertainty. And if anything, the past 3 months has proven that people do not like uncertainty. So, Juliette, would you please, obviously your background in Homeland Security, please give us your thought as far as the past 3 months in this whole concept of tariffs. Where do you think this is coming from, and where do you think it's going?
Great, and thank you for having me. I'm getting a double feed. Are you hearing me okay?
I'm hearing you fine. So
okay, sorry about that. Let me see.
We're all good.
We're good. Okay, good. As long as you don't get that. I was sorry about that. It turns out sovereign nations have sovereignty. And so the Bush administration over the course of the last 10 weeks or so has been laying on various threats or real tariffs. We saw most of them happen on Liberation Day yesterday, April 2nd. And we are going to see the consequences of what it means to tinker dramatically without any value system behind it, right? There's no war that you're going to punish, the Russians for or whatever else, with no values behind it except for the generic, the United States is being screwed and we're going to screw everyone else. And you're going to see that the reaction by sovereign nations to that, and it's not going to be great for American consumers. The idea, just 2 points on this. I mean, one is the idea that there's carve out. So the question is can you, will some country get a carve out? Or interesting, Russia didn't have any tariffs put on it, or the oil and gas industry. There's no carve out of this. Like the tariffs are so intense that the idea that, for example, the shipping industry or the oil and gas industry, which is dependent on the shipping industry and the airline industry, isn't going to be impacted is ridiculous. Of course it is, because if you don't have good shipping, you don't have people moving. The second thing is we're going to all of a sudden see how national security and homeland security align, because the tariffs, right, are going to impact American consumers, and also realign a lot of countries. This is what happens when sovereign nations have sovereignty towards China. So what you've already seen is Japan, South Korea, and Korea start to align. You're going to see now Vietnam, a lot of countries that we were the market for need a market, and they're going to find it elsewhere.
Thomas, you want to jump on that? Because obviously you've written about like this in your books, as far as sort of the like balkanization of the world into different spheres. What is your thought on this so far?
Well, it seems like such a risky ploy to be simultaneously load shedding security obligations across the Eastern Hemisphere and layering on this tariff war. I mean, you're really attacking the two great sources of American power in the system, the sense that we're the backstop on global security, and that, we always show up, and that creates a certain certainty all its own. And then there's the demand power that we have throughout the system. And, we've been the center of demand for a long time, recently eclipsed by the Chinese. That makes us nervous, because the future of globalization doesn't look like us anymore, doesn't feel like us, doesn't seem like it's customized for us like it was for decades. And to take both those steps right now and attack those two pillars at the same time just creates an enormous amount of uncertainty that Trump thinks he's going to benefit from. But I think, per Juliette's point, I see a big rush for deal making among everybody other than the United States for the rest of this year. And you're going to see some really big deals, even regional trade pacts come out of nowhere, I think, deals between them, because they're going to be so eager to seek, as she pointed out, new markets. And we're giving up a lot of leverage in the system, just unilaterally.
Yeah, and Tom, to that point, Juliette made the comment earlier about national security. So what is your take respects to how this is going to impact, our presence in the world in respects to, and what I mean, like supply chain of parts that go into defense systems or whatever. I mean, this has widespread implications. Tom?
So, I think one of the biggest challenges is, as you said, the markets don't like uncertainty. Everything that Juliette and Thomas have said is true, but we also just don't know how it's going to shake out. If you look at these first 10 weeks of the Trump administration, he's a disruptor. He says big, grand things and then pulls them back. He says big, grand things and then reverses. So we'll have to see which allies and partners come back with tariffs of their own and which try to negotiate a way out of this. And it really is too soon to know whether this, the greatest tariffs in 100 years are going to stay just as they were announced in the Rose Garden, Brian, or we can see something in 4 weeks very, very different than we have now, and we just don't know.
Yeah.
Tom,
I'm curious about, can we have dialogue on myself? Because
yes, please.
I hear this too. I mean, and you know this much better than me, like, is there a point in which, like, we'll see what Trump does and the back and forth, like that becomes actually intolerable, and that at some stage it becomes a permanent rift? Like all these countries know what to do, they're going to kiss the ring, they're going to but at some stage either that becomes intolerable because it's so unpredictable, or they unite against us. Because I hear this too, and you're seeing it where, with the universities as well. Do you kiss the ring? Do you whatever? At some stage, everyone's going to get tired of it.
Well, and the analogy, Juliette's exactly right, to national security. More of my area is, the hardcore national security.
Yeah.
Look at Ukraine.
Yeah.
Zelensky came, didn't kiss the ring. Trump cut off military aid and intelligence. Then when Zelensky was a little nicer, he got the intel and arms flowing again. But now Pete Hegseth, the new defense secretary, for the first time, is not going to attend the Ukraine meeting of 50 nations talking about Ukraine on the same day that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is at NATO, making nice to NATO and saying only increase your spending. So this administration is a disruptor. It has many voices. They're not speaking together. They're not even a choir in harmony yet. So that is my concern. Again, Brian's great point. Uncertainty is the enemy. We are in for a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
A to Z, economy, national security, homeland security.
Yeah.
There's one point that I want to, you kind of may allude to, Joe, the back and forth with the Trump administration. But like, I was listening to a podcast with Anthony Scaramucci. I probably butchered his last name wrong, but he said Trump is the king of the boiling frog. I mean, it's like he's the king. He can put something out there. He's like, oh, it's not going to happen. But over time, what he does say ends up going down that route. Yeah. And so to that point, and maybe it goes back to kind of ties into as far as kissing the ring. And I'll give an example. There's the whole concept as far as that approach also internally, as far as government is concerned, in the sense that I have a concern as far as the past 3 months that there's been a breaking down not only international rules, but our basic rule of law, in the sense that you think that the judges will be free and clear, but they're talking about impeaching judges that don't like the decision. That sounds crazy, but again, it's the boiling frog. You say it, bring it back, but it just seems like it incrementally moves forward. And Juliette, in this atmosphere, especially domestic national security, I can't imagine the turmoil internal within the Dodge, the Department of Homeland Security, as far as people.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it's. I mean, it's twofold. I mean, one is, and I won't get into, the politics of immigration, but obviously our entire Homeland Security apparatus is aligned with border enforcement and mass deportations. That may be part of our mission, but all of us know that the homeland is vulnerable to a lot of other risks as well: cyber, climate, pandemics, measles, you name it. I think the more the thing I'm looking at and have been written about is this idea of efficiency being the standard by which we judge a lot of our government efforts. So like what you'll see is, must say who's against efficiency. And like most Democrats will even give him that. Like they'll be like, yes, of course, I don't want waste and fraud, but I don't like the way you're doing it. So it's a stupid conversation, but I think it's not the right way to look at a lot of government investments. I'm in the world of preparedness, preparing for a disaster, whatever it may be, terrorism, hurricanes, whatever. It is hard to measure preparedness on an efficiency standard. It's called the preparedness paradox for that reason, right? The more you invest in being prepared, the less harm there is, and the more people wonder why the hell did they invest in the preparedness, right? It is a paradox. It's hard to prove until the bad thing happens, which you don't wish for. And I think in a lot of these cuts, these are preparedness cuts. These are NOAA telling us what hurricane season is going to be like, right? I can't say that that's efficient, but I sure like to know it, right? So it's that kind of stuff that I think is a real challenge in the risk on-off aspect of it, is our knowledge of things so that we can be better prepared is being cut left and right.
Yeah, I mean, that's your point. Like my background is insurance and risk, and
yes, of course.
Try to prepare for the worst and hope for the best, but that's hard to explain. People don't think the bad thing's going to happen. But Thomas, going sort of back to Ukraine and where we are internationally, I mean, what is your perception as far as when you think about our position? We were the bright shining city on the hill that the West would look to for values and for democracy and things. It's kind of hard to make that argument these days, and as a result, there's something to be said about degradation of soft power. And if anything, nature abhors a vacuum, and if we're going to retract, some other country's going to step in.
Yeah, and it's a lot of this is a response to the sense that we were stuck kind of paying the bill. We were the market maker in the system going back to World War II. And we did get, quote unquote, ripped off by design. We wanted to see countries rise peacefully, and we let them sell to us better than we could sell to them. And there was an implicit agreement there that trade surplus would largely be funneled back into our debt markets to allow us to maintain the Leviathan force that we have. And it was a brilliant system. It really worked fantastically from the 90s through about 2008. And then we looked around and said, man, we are overstretched on this global war on terrorism. we got to get back to being who we are, which is a market player like anybody else. And that swing, because we're Americans, can't occur kind of naturally. It has to be that we were duped, that we were lied to, that it was a giant conspiracy, and we have to go after these people, and we need some sort of almost like a cultural revolution from the boomers, of course, before they exit the stage politically right at this point. So it's scary for the world to see us try to shift personas. You know, Trump isn't wrong to want to shift personas, but he is the epitome of the American approach, which is way over the top. And we're selling such a negative vision of ourselves right now. But understand what he's referencing in terms of history. You know, he talks McKinley, he talks Teddy Roosevelt, he talks rising America. He wants to get back into kind of a rising America mode so he could take on the Chinese, who are very much in that rising mode. And he wants to symmetricize a lot of the things that we're doing around the world. Okay, so the Chinese aren't stuck with all sorts of military obligations around the world. They are literally cementing countries to their version of a globalization. Yeah. And he wants to get back into that. And his mindset is not unlike a Nixon or a Kissinger, say, in 68. He comes in and he sees, I'm locked in on everything. I'm locked into these relationships, these antagonisms, these responsibilities. And I want to clear the deck. I want to load shed all this stuff if I can and get back to this kind of American spirit from the late 19th century. The problem, of course, is you can't kind of travel back to the way the world operated back then or the global economy back then. So it's a rather fantastic steering by your rearview mirror sort of approach. And it feels good to a lot of people. And there's this underlying sense in America that our political and economic and social models aren't well attuned to this sort of singularity, the onset of AI, all the threats to jobs, the demographic collapse that people are starting to pick up on. Yep. And then this increasingly sort of north-south tension that we get with climate change. These are all a lot of things that give the public a sense that we're not well prepared for it. And, you know, Biden was very much a status quo, a restoration kind of figure. And so they went back to Trump and said, you know, have at it. Let's see what we can do. Let's see your big bang. And they're pursuing that big bang, like in every possible sphere, with a very nihilistic sense to it, very Steve Bannon-like, which is, if I do it badly, it doesn't matter. If I do it well, I do it badly, it doesn't matter because I'm destroying the old, and the new, in the form of the tech bros and all that, are going to come flying in. And there is some logic to all that. It's just being done so crudely and so brutally. And, you know, like with the tariff thing, he's not announcing a redo of Bretton Woods or anything. He's not putting any marker downstream saying this is where we're going to settle all this. He's just picking fights, you know, 360.
Tell me, I did that, yeah.
If I could hop in here, it's interesting to know, to Juliette's point about the preparedness paradigm, you know, there's a real contradiction, if not hypocrisy, in what's going on, because nobody says that if you field billion-dollar aircraft carrier battle groups and then never use them in war, that's wasted money.
Right.
Yeah. So preparedness to defend the homeland from climate change, fires, typhoons, et cetera, that's dollars well spent. And the cut in foreign aid, Thomas talked about China, its Belt and Roads initiatives. It's so interesting. The President, George W. Bush, who launched this nation probably on one of its most strategic failures, the invasion of Iraq, is also the president who brought the PEPFAR program to Africa, fighting AIDS, saving millions and millions of lives. You go to Africa, those nations adore President Bush to the same degree that he is hated in Iraq. And so that money, a general once said to me, if we cut back money on foreign aid, we better put it in bombs and bullets. And only cutting back foreign aid, but not investing wisely elsewhere.
Yeah.
It is, and I think that's part of this whole, in my mind, it's like we try to explain why you're doing investments in soft power like that. It's like saving for your retirement. People don't think it's ever going to happen, and why do I have to save for it? But it does happen. But these investments do accrue compounding interest, and you get benefit. when the United States sends the Peace Corps to South Africa or to work there, or in the middle of Central America, that is us bringing hope and promise in the American spirit, and that develops spirit. And I think it's the problem. Why are we sending money overseas when we bring money here? Well, yeah, there's a balance. I can walk and chew gum at the same time, because you have short-term gains and you have long-term interest, and that's where I think it gets cut off in the conversation, in the sense that soft power does bring power. It does allow you to influence people, make decisions. But we're in such a short, narrow mindset that it's hard to people.
Well, I think about this. My next piece for The Atlantic that I should post this week is the soft power of, we're a pretty awesome country to visit, right? We were stable, but gun violence always worried foreigners about coming here, but it's a beautiful country. It's got diverse places to visit. It's got New York City, like whatever. I mean, I'm looking at these numbers of like future flows, and it's not just Canada. 8% down from Germany last February to this February. 9% down from France. Like, it turns out that, like, that you can only crap on people so much and their countries, even if they don't like their governments, until they stop. They don't see us. They're not that into us. That's what it's titled. They're not that into us. But that the monetary impact, 10% of U.S. GDP is what we would call writ large the tourism industry, right? And that's airplanes and cruises and hotels and whatever. That's going to take a big hit. And so the idea that soft power isn't measurable, like it is. I mean, we're going to see it this summer. We're going to see these coastal communities in Maine and Fort Lauderdale, be impacted. So
now, Thom, obviously, how would you just sort of, as far as, again, national security, the benefits of soft power, as far as how we're, the ability to project American power across, not just with a aircraft carrier, but with our ideas and our philosophies.
That's so true. And it's also, Brian, it's pennies on the dollar. I mean, I was heartbroken. I'm an apolitical person, but I was heartbroken at the death of VOA, Radio Free Europe, Radio Asia, etc. I spent a decade behind the Iron Curtain. Everybody strung wire from their little radio, circling around the kitchen, through the living room and bedroom to get through Soviet jamming to hear American jazz and American news. The only people who are happy with Trump cutting money to these radio broadcasts are in Beijing and in Moscow. And it's so inexpensive. I know that Trump has issues with some of the coverage of VOA. That's fine. He's the commander in chief. But this soft power, we are surrendering the battlefield of the mind to our adversaries.
Thom, do you want to add to that?
Well, one of the reasons I wrote America's New Map, the book, was this. I wanted to attack this kind of dual sense of fear that was building, not just within the United States, whites feeling like their privilege was going away because the future of the country isn't looking like them so much anymore. And then that dual sense of America's looking out to the world and realizing the future of globalization is mostly non-Western, non-American, non-Christian, non-European, non-white. And that creates a lot of existential angst that Trump has really gotten into, and exploited and weaponized very effectively. But we're losing some very long-term, and we're all talking about the same kinds of things. We're losing this long-term capital that we've built up in the system for decades, and we're going to get a sense as to how valuable that really was. I mean, just think about, when people buy your long-term public debt, they're buying their faith in your future. Right. When they stop believing in you representing the future, they're going to stop buying your debt. Think about a global economy that's about 4 billion people with disposable income, going up to about 6 billion by mid-century. That's a big boost. That's a big market. That's a big opportunity. Most of it's going to happen in Africa, which is going to be 1 out of 4 people in the world mid-century. And most of them are going to be under age 18. So you got to represent the future in these kinds of environment, because if you're not out there networking and wiring people up and capturing all that economic and communication within your IT systems, you're not going to have the access to the big data that's going to propel AI development.
Okay.
And that's where money meets the road in a big sense. And it gets into all sorts of national security stuff. We're surrendering more than we realize when we abandon the field like that.
I agree. Yeah. Just take a moment for everybody who's sitting or watching this, thinking to join my all-star panel of Risk On, Risk Off. Mm-hmm. If you have questions you want to bring to the attention of the panel, look at the bottom right-hand corner. You see a picture of me that says add a comment. Please type in your comment. Good. As long as you keep it PG clean and appropriate, I'll bring it to the attention of the panel. So let's get back into it. Thom, you made a comment, which we've talked about in your book. We talked about it last time, but you made allusion to, but I think it's part of this ecosystem, and that is the demographic collapse. You said in your book, I think it was 1950s, the overall breakdown of the American population was like 90% white, 10% minority.
White, 1950.
Yeah. 90%, Now it's crossed over where whites are smaller. And as a result, things have changed. And whenever people I hear talk about, I want to go back to the 50s. Okay, well, it wasn't so great for everybody. But part of that is because there is this, and I think what Trump has jumped into is this underlying fear of the future, because people are afraid of the future, and they're going to lose. I don't say the word privilege, or the way of life is going to change so dramatically. They're not going to.
They're not the center of the universe in the same way they were before, and people don't realize what it is to be the center of the universe.
Yeah,
like the boomers within our consumption model and America within the world's consumption model. The whole world for decades revolved around what we liked, and so it never seemed like we were culturally imperialistic to anybody because it was all our values going out. And for the longest time, people were vilifying us for Americanization, Westernization. Notice how nobody says that anymore. Nobody talks along those lines globally. Instead, it's all inbound kind of fear. And I don't think you can look at this whole shift going back to 2006, 2008, right, the Tea Party, without understanding this fundamental transformation that's going on basically in my lifetime, where whites go from 90% to about 45%.
Unbelievable. It's remarkable.
It's never happened.
Yeah. And so, Julie, but that ties into, we made probably, so like from my perspective, when I look at this bigger picture, when we have a demographic shift, one of the big things that's being impacted, that the Social Security trustee said in 2030, if less things change, we're looking at a 20% cut in benefits. And as a result of that, because the way its system it was created, you had like 8 people working for one person out there in the field, but people retired at 65 and they died at 67. Now time goes by. Fewer people having kids, but people living longer. And as a result, there's the pressure on the system. So unless you're going to, and there's a whole thing that you may change this program, but you raise taxes, you delay retirement. But also, you just need more workers. You need people to come in to support people with Social Security. And as like Peter Zion likes to say, it takes 30 years to come up with a 30-year-old worker. These workers aren't going to appear overnight by everybody starting having more babies. But that's where the issue comes in, because in the New York Times did a great post tonight, post on LinkedIn, studying the job. It was a builder who could build his home, so he kept all the documents and everything of what the impact is going to be to housing with the crackdown inflation and the tariffs. And it was basically looking back, it's going to be an 18% increase in the cost of his house.
Sure.
And so it just seems like this. I mean, obviously the border security needs to be secured, and we can argue whether or not the Biden administration did an appropriate job. But there is an issue in the sense that there's not enough workers to do the job, and the boomers retiring. You need more people to come in, but then that has to admit more people are going to come in who don't look like us, and that's where I think part of this problem comes.
Right. That's exactly right. I mean, I there's a lot of lessons learned about sort of how did we come to this stage, and I don't mean that Trump versus Harris. I mean, how did this vision of America as children of the corn, philosophy, how did that win over a counter narrative? And, I'm shameless plug for a book that I know we've all heard about, but Abundance Now, that's out by 2 very keen observers of the world. the image that the pie is limited, and you better kick out, knock out, destroy the person who might take your chair. And that tends to be the other. That is the image now. There's another image, and we got to figure out how do we pursue that image. And what you said is, in the interim, until we figure out how do we tell that story of American abundance, as they say, and where I think, because it doesn't feel that now, the day after tariffs, it is going to be lashed out against immigration and generally like this DEI thing, right? Which DEI ultimately is a belief that something is deserved and someone else doesn't deserve it. Now, we can debate about whether its implementation was bad, but the idea that Pete Hegseth, we all get one person in our lives who you're like, I can't believe it's true. The idea that Pete Hegseth gets to complain about DEI when there's never been a less qualified Secretary of Defense. You may like that, but you have to admit it. I'm not going to debate about whether there's been lesser qualified Secretaries of Defense. There haven't. I've gone through them all. Is where we are right now. We've got to just come up with this counter image because the demographics aren't changing. Demographics aren't changing, and we have to better prepare Americans for this, so that hate, radicalization, condemning the other, good faith, kindness come back, right? I mean, that's what this is about. And we're going to talk about 8 trans, teenagers like that. This is what this country, come on, there's much bigger things.
It's interesting. If I could, thank you so much. Juliette talked about DEI at the Pentagon. And again, as someone who looks for narratives, it was amazing to me that one of Secretary Hegseth's first orders was to deploy the destroyer Gravely from just coming home from waters off of Yemen to circle the Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico, with no sense of irony at all. The Gravely, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, is named after Vice Admiral Sam Gravely, the first African-American to make admiral and the highest-ranking African-American in the military until that Colin Powell guy came along. Mm-hmm. Commander of the Pacific Fleet. This is not a guy who had gotten jobs because of the color of his skin. Yeah. He was good at it. And in a military that is, the numbers are a little, uncertain, at least 50% people of color and women. What does it say when you say that doesn't matter? Hegseth and Trump are right. We need to refocus on the warfighter, on lethality, absolutely 100%. But they seem to have forgotten that having a military drawn from people of diverse backgrounds, languages, and skills brings a lethality all its own.
Yeah, Tom, and I'm going to add to that and Thomas, I want you to join after this, because when DI was rolled out, and I was like, then I read Stanley McChrystal's book, Risk: A User's Guide, which, by the way, if you get me on the show, I love him. And he made the argument, and it was like the best argument I've seen about as far as how he implemented DEI to make sure decision making was being done properly, and that many points of view being brought to the table, because he talks about inherent bias. If you got 5 guys all bet middle, maybe white and 50, and they went to West Point looking at a problem, do you know you're actually looking at the problem from all the proper solutions, rather versus maybe one of your veteran staff sergeants has a different perspective, or someone who didn't go to West Point, they went to Cal Berkeley, they have a different perspective. So that's where my mind kind of opened my mind. Is like, that is the power of diversity in DEI, is making sure you have multiple points of perception. And it's not just color, it's race, education, religion, whatever, so that you are bringing all variables to the table to make sure you're making the best effective decision versus leaving out the key component, which could jeopardize the entire program. And Thomas, you want to add to that?
Yeah. If you look at the history of the world, any write-up of global history, it's pretty much middle-aged straight white guys doing everything, accomplishing everything, inventing everything, settling everything. And that's like 1.5% of the world's population.
Correct.
Okay, so
it's
if you're
unbelievable.
DEI, then you want to narrow your perspective down as much as possible to that old dominant situation, and you're kind of sticking your head in the sand with regard to the future that's barreling at you with its demands and its desires. On the military thing, I would make the argument that DEI becomes even more important for the military because, the technological singularity is arriving earlier in the military realm. We are seeing in Ukraine a battlefield that's too dangerous for troops. That if you just put them out there, you might as well just shoot them yourself. Yeah. I mean, they're killing people in their beds. It's absolutely amazing. The death rate from drones is up to about 70%. Give it another 5 years, it'll be 99%. Yeah. And we have a completely mechanized, post-human battle space. And in that universe, diversity, equity, inclusion probably won't matter.
Yeah.
But when you see all this other stuff shoving in the direction of security and border and neighbor relations and hemispheric relations, and Trump prefers to deploy his troops along the border, that kind of stuff. I mean, that cannot be a white male only kind of military. That's just going to be disastrously inappropriate for the world that you're dealing with. So I think we're still moving dramatically from a world of zero-sum defense to a world of non-zero-sum security. And in that non-zero-sum security world, be out there networking, connecting, grabbing all that big data, getting all that AI fuel for your future. And if you're going to sit back and pretend to be the hermit kingdom of North America and emulate, Orban and Kim Jong-un and Putin and these types, it is a declining, it is a very declining future. It's an abrasive decline that's absolutely stunning.
Tom, you add to that? Yeah.
Abrasive is such a good word. Sorry, I've been looking for words, and I think that's right. No, because it's like that's like the texture that it feels like right now. Yeah.
So Tom, you want to add something?
Yeah, and just to hop on what Thomas said and give it a big foot stomp, this administration talks about getting lethality to the front. And just like, waste, fraud, and abuse, who doesn't oppose that? Who opposes lethality to the front? But what Thomas said is true. 70% of the combat injuries and deaths in Ukraine have been from drones. They talk about lethality, but this country, our military and defense department, every drone purchased since the beginning of drone technology to today would only last 2 months at the burn rate we see on the ground in Ukraine today. So they're not investing in what's clearly the most important lethal weapon of the future.
Yeah.
So I want to add, so Tom, it's a good pivot in Ukraine. And we're talking about coarseness. And I got in a pretty good argument with a friend of mine this weekend. A couple of drinks might have been involved. Regards.
That was off the record, though, right?
To Ukraine, and there's a vein of this in the country as far as Ukraine started the war. Ukraine was responsible for the war, their actions, the West, and Russia, and somehow Ukraine just going to have to just give up territories, and that's because. And Thomas, I want you to add this because this theory, this guy was like, well, if you're bigger, you can take the land. And I go, well, that's completely against everything we've talked about as far as a country and establishing the rule of laws and border security, understanding the rules and following the process. But now it's might makes right, which we all know is just a bad decision through history. But that's not just also coming through like the media. I know, Thomas, you do a lot with national security and media. So can you, for your perspective, how do we get to this point where I'm not going into politics, but like it's just amazing the politics of Reagan, the Reagan party is like, this is what we're doing now. We're siding with the bad guys.
Right.
Tom, would you take that?
Sorry.
Thomas, after you go first, sir.
I'm very much of the opinion that the blame the victim kind of situation with Ukraine is entirely inappropriate. But and I also dislike the whole notion of blaming NATO for this.
Yeah,
I think that's absolutely wrong. What they did was they went eastward to integrate and to deal with potential future security problems. And it's worked really quite well. I mean, that's why it's happening in Ukraine and not in Poland and other places. Okay. But we do have to understand this is all part of a large divorce that's been going on
Yeah.
in the old Soviet bloc going back 35 years now. And, you know, almost all the stepchildren, so to speak, of Eastern Europe went to mom. They went with mom and they're having a new life and it's fantastic.
Mhm.
And what's left over are kind of the original Russian Empire birth children. Okay. And when we got to that point, or when NATO got to that point, it really was a very serious Rubicon that sort of says to Europe, you're not going to get to integrate anymore towards the East. I mean, you kind of hit the nerve there. Do I believe Ukraine's ever going to be whole again on this basis? I don't.
Yeah.
You know, I think we modeled a lot of behavior in the global war on terror, and that behavior is being replicated by all the major players out there, to include assassinating their own citizens abroad. And if you want to take down a regime, you call them a bunch of names. You create a whole bunch of data saying that they're very bad, and then you take them down and you don't apologize.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, you know, we did that for a good 15 years, and the rest of the world is like, well, that's how we get to do it too, to the point where Putin, you know, expressed surprise when we got all upset when he went into Ukraine. He said, you know, I called them all the right names. I checked all the right boxes. I've made all the correct accusations, just like you did in Iraq.
Yeah.
So what's the big deal? We are heading a bit into that kind of situation because there's a natural decoupling now from an East-West world to more of a North-South world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's right.
So, you know, Europe is its own serious demand center, production center, competitor to the United States. And so we're decoupling a bit because we're looking at them and going, you know, these guys are kind of taking us to the cleaners on certain levels. And they look at us more like that over time. Same thing going on with the Chinese. So you're seeing what was this transatlantic, trans-Pacific stuff all go down, and more people are looking towards the South and saying, there's the future. There's where I want to dominate. And, you know, the United States now is sort of saying, I don't care about any of that outside of my hemisphere. You know, again, that late 19th
century. Not even. I mean, just if you think of Canada and
Canada, But the Chinese are very aggressively and systematically, you know, the metaphor I use is playing Go. You know, America plays poker, the Russians play Chinese. The Russians play chess, and the Chinese play Go. Okay, so we're very fixated on these showdowns. And we think we got to have the winning hand in this showdown or that showdown, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's kick Iran's ass, whether it's take care of the Chinese if they go after Taiwan. We really believe that this is kind of deciding the future of the world, these flashpoints, which are all tailbones from the Cold War. They're all 60, 70, 80 years old. Okay, so if we could have the entirety of globalization come about with those problems being there, you know, we could certainly see globalization moving on with those problems still there. Because 8 decades of doing it.
It's tough.
So we really need to start thinking more along the lines of the Chinese who are out there putting these stones down all around the world.
Well, just look at Myanmar's earthquake. I mean, we're absent. We have no USAID, and you look at the countries that are going there. It's China.
Yep.
I mean, it is, and you know, not that we need strong alliances with me, but the rest of the world sees that, right? So it's not just the economy
outspending us. 9-1.
9-1.
Tom, Tom, I'll get you to add to this as well.
Yeah, let me jump in. Brian, I was very touched by your citation of Reagan a moment ago, because the Trump administration's foreign policy, peace through strength. I mean, it goes back to ancient Rome, and Abraham Lincoln or George Washington used it, but it really is a birth child of Ronald Reagan, who brought peace through strength in his confrontation with the Soviets. Now, Trump can say he is peace through strength. He's the president. But look at what Reagan's peace through strength was. It was standing up to authoritarians, not coddling them. Yeah. Ronald Reagan's signature moment, standing at the Brandenburg Gate shaking his fist to the east and saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. If Ronald Reagan were president 3 years ago when Putin invaded Ukraine, he would have been the first American to Kyiv saying, Mr. Putin, pull back your tanks.
Yeah.
So we have really our foreign policy, and Democrat and even Republican centrists who grew up with Ronald Reagan do not understand what the Republican Party or Trump or foreign policy is today.
Yeah. So, Julie, I'd like to come back to you as far as just national security here. And like, I've been really disturbed in seeing what was the head of the FBI New York office got pushed out because people did their job. Yeah. And they had this wonderful procession of bagpipes and people were out there just saying goodbye. But that old aspect, and having these sort of going back to the widespread this bludgeoning of layoffs. There's something to be said about I'm younger and I still had aspirations to get to law enforcement, federal law, but having that sort of people want to aspire to get into civil service, and whether it be Homeland Security, Border Security, the Foreign Service, to serve on behalf of the country in a greater cause. Sure doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of respect for people out there in the government field. And if anything, that seems like you're degrading the overall resiliency of the country, because whether it be at Homeland Security or NIH or NOA, you're not keeping the best people, and you're also not attracting the best people.
Well, that's the second part is the one that worries me more, right? Obviously you want to keep the best people. An FBI agent who's staying said to me, he's like, people leave and, that's not great. And we don't like people getting pushed out. He's like, no one qualified wants to work here anymore. So they're going to probably lower the qualification standards. And guess who wants to work here? Right. They're all the podcast bros, like all the, your two leaders of the FBI are conspiracy theorists right now. So who do you think is going to want to work for them? And so it will be very interesting to see, not just tomorrow, which is how apparently DOJ measures everything. It will be, what does the FBI look like in what year are we? 2028.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. Yeah. Thom, your thoughts?
So it's interesting, Trump and the administration, all the MAGA world talk about this deep state.
Yeah.
Well, I actually know people who are members of what they call the deep state. They're career military, their career civil service, senior executive service, that they are not an evil blob out to stop the administration. All bureaucracies have their problems. I get that. The Defense Secretary Bob Gates once told me the problem with DOD is that only one or two people can say yes and everybody else can say no. Okay, so if you're a leader, that's a bureaucratic problem. But what this crowd runs the risk of doing is creating the opposition deep state that they say exists now and doesn't. Like within DOD, they're trying to limit some press access to desks and workspaces. They haven't shut them out yet, thank goodness. That would be terrible. But what they don't understand is that DOD, the building has 23,000 people in the Pentagon. All of them are potential sources. There are 1.1 million people in uniform, active duty alone. Any one of them is a source. Putting your thumb in the eye of major media by saying you can't have a desk here anymore is not going to accomplish your goal. They need to focus on their narrative and their message and trying to understand and work with the media, not think that they can fight, because that's when the bureaucracy really will turn against them.
Thom, you want to that?
In my book, I use the example of how many senators does it take from red states to basically hold the government hostage, to create that filibuster line of defense. Yeah. It turns out you can get senators representing 19% of America, 19%, and they can hold the rest off. Okay, and so we're into Nicholas Taleb's intransigent minority. Mm-hmm. The kind of things that we would look at Italy in the past, or say Israel, and we'd say, my God, how could three people on the fringe take over the U.S. government and stop these things and create, cessation of government activities and these wild things. And honestly, when I put it in the book, I looked it up and I said, wow, when things really started to fall apart in South Africa with apartheid,
mm-hmm.
whites were about 19%. And so how do you sustain that? You sustain it through state-sanctioned violence and oppression and creating this sort of alternative deep state that Thom references, which is, classic Trump, I know you are, but what am I? Sort of response to everything, always creating the very thing that he's declaiming. And when you get that image from two of the most important tech bros, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, who grew up in South Africa during the collapse of apartheid, you're starting to get now this message from the Trump administration that, we have to do these things. Otherwise, you're going to end up just like the whites in South Africa, who are hunted down and killed on a regular basis, even though the whites there, although they're a tiny fraction of the population, control half the land and are doing really quite amazingly well. It's stunning to me that they're using this as a cudgel. This is the image of the future that you have to run from, white America. And if you don't let us take care of this problem and do these things to our government, you're going to find yourselves, under the thumb of whomever, but they're certainly going to be non-white and non-Christian. And so that sense of, whites moving into majority-minority status, Christians moving into majority-minority status, all these things happening at the same time really have to be part of our explanation, because, when we do it all externally and blame it all on globalization and these kinds of things, we're missing the really primal feelings that people have. This is not the country I grew up in. People no longer look like me. They no longer talk like me. They no longer worship in the same way like me. And it's making me nervous, and I want somebody to stop it. And I don't care what you have to do to stop it.
All right. So I know I wrote time sensitive, guys. I got you for like another 10 minutes. So I've got a question I want to ask each one of you, and I want you to extrapolate on. And so this is, Julie, I think you might appreciate this. When I've done in the past working, traveling the country, the world, doing biz impact analysis, try to help clients understand, what's those things that go bump in the middle of the night that would make things go wrong. And the one question I always ask is, everybody go, if you stop and think about it, what's going on in the world? What's the one thing that keeps you up at night? And so I want to go start with Thom, Thomas, and you can finish with you, Juliette. Thom, if you think about the world as we stand right now, think about right now, what's the X thing that if this happens, you're going to be really, really concerned?
Well, Brian, this one surprise you because you've educated me on this. I think climate security is the number one threat that we face, and in ways that people don't really understand. It's not just the hurricanes and the storms and the heat, but it's the forced migration of huge populations from Africa north into Europe, from South America central into the US. There is not a border wall high enough to keep out what the World Bank predicts will be climate forced migration toward the US in the next 20 years. Let alone for the military, rising waters are going to flood Norfolk and Coronado and major installations, threat to crops. So it's not like the existential threat in the movies where we have to go to Mars or live underground, but it's going to be a world that looks very, very different and is far more unstable. And it's almost to the point where it can't be stopped.
Yeah. And before I go to Thomas, so Thom, there was a really good podcast I was listening to. I have to find it about, it was a financial bend analyst. And you're talking about, whether or not municipal bonds are appropriately factoring in the threat to climate change. And you think about if you're doing a, say, water sanitation project in Galveston, Texas, and you're hoping to get, like right now, maybe it's still like a 5% rate, but is that for a 30-year bond? Are you really sure that project's still going to be there generating revenue? And that I got to find it, but it just sort of tells me that. I don't think you really understand.
Again, just a shout out and a thanks to you, Brian, as host. I mean, you really helped me see this clearer. So the work you're doing on this is really important.
Thank you, Thom. I appreciate that. Thomas, what keeps you up at night?
Well, obviously the same thing that keeps Thom up. And that's why I wrote the book with climate change and demographic collapse. And I thought, man, it's too alarmist. It's just not going to work. And yet look at what we're doing. Look at the ways we're describing the world. Same with comparing America to apartheid in South Africa. I thought, I can't possibly get this past a book editor. It's just way too much. And yet it's coming at us at high speed. So agree with everything Thom says. I will make a more short-term argument of something that can get out of control very quickly. I think Israel's made it clear that it's eradicating Gaza. That's always been the plan, and that they're liquidating that ghetto, so to speak, to use an historical allusion that would probably make a lot of people uncomfortable. They're getting rid of the threat vector. They can't get rid of Hamas, but they can get rid of Gaza, and they are progressively doing it. And it's the way it's going to be. We're not going to stop that, and they know they have a solid 24 months, and really almost 48 months with Trump, even if he loses midterms badly, to do whatever they have to do. They have the writ. So does the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Okay. And I think the Israelis now are looking at the chance to really settle all family debts in the region very quickly. Not just take down the axis of resistance that they've been beating rather heavily, not just eradicate Gaza as a threat vector, but go after Iran, because you're not going to get the full benefits of the Abraham Accords, which is the one thing Trump has really done that's kind of amazing, unless you really kneecap Iran. And I think they are so back on their heels right now. I think Israel is feeling such a momentum and such a backstopping from the Trump administration that there's a very good chance that we'll go after Iran in a big regime takedown ambition sort of strike. I mean, really heavy. Not U.S. troops, but I mean, really heavy, going after them. And I think that explains one of the reasons why Trump wants to
Thom,
get off the Russia thing and take them out of that equation. So that's the one I'm worried about.
All right, Thom.
I'll just be half a minute. No, I'll just be half a minute because I have a hard stop at 1. But I think for me, I agree everything that both Thom and Thom said. So I'll add a different one, which is I worry about violence as becoming the sort of natural extension of our democratic norms. And from Elon Musk, putting the picture of a judge's daughter on to just the radicalization that's happening in this country. I think we too quickly moved past the pardoning of the January 6th organizers. There may be people there may have been a group of people, even a couple hundred, who that might have been appropriate. They got caught up in the wrong place. They have a penalty. They've served their time. And I think that could be reforming in ways. And this is the last piece. That is why the strategy to counter this has to be, is that you make that wildly unpopular. And so, various special elections or a judicial election become a way in which you're expressing that.
Right. Juliette, thanks so much for coming. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining.
I got class. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
We have class.
Well, guys, Thomas, this has been a fantastic conversation. I thank you so much for joining. I appreciate your insight. I really have enjoyed your books and following you, and look to have you back in the future. And if you find yourself in Dallas, please let me know. So,
thanks, Brian. Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you.
So that's another episode of Risk On, Risk Off. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. This is going to be available to you on my YouTube channel. And if there's any sort of topic in this future you want to see, please send me a note. I'd love to have, you can make an introduction on behalf of your friends. Love to have some interesting guests, have some interesting conversations. Until next time, guys.